So next up on our schedule is a video of our narrative budget. And the narrative budget was produced by the communications team and by Maria Gillespie and her team in the Office of Administration and Finance. And they've done a great job of really telling the story of how our budget for the diocese actually funds and underwrites and lifts up the priorities that we've been talking about this morning, our missional priorities around becoming beloved community. So communications will share that video at this time.
It's been a tough year, no doubt about it. The pandemic, social unrest, and a tumultuous election have come together to affect virtually every aspect of our lives. And yet, some things didn't change. For the last few years, the work of the Diocese of North Carolina has been focused on 5 mission priorities in our journey of becoming beloved community. The priorities were built on the foundation of work that came before. And since the pillars that serve as our guideposts were announced in 2017, the work has been unwavering, ongoing, and growing. Just like our work, the proposed 2021 budget is organized around our mission priorities. The work of the diocesan budget is the work of the collective we that is the Diocese of North Carolina. The gifts and strengths of this diocese has always been and continues to be the 120 worshiping communities that comprise it. Especially in a year like this, we have learned to adapt, share the lessons we've learned, teach each other how to do what's working, be honest and open with each other about the unprecedented road we're navigating, and support one another in every way we can. So let's take a look at what's developing for 2021. We start on the income side. Our fair share percentage will be reduced to a rate of 10.65% for 2021. There have been questions throughout the year about reducing the fair share because of the pandemic, but the fact is that there is not much room to reduce it from where it is. We are canonically required to have a rate of at least 10%, and diocesan leadership began the journey toward that rate years ago. Despite the pandemic, it should be noted that all churches paid their fair share in 2019 and are on track to do so for 2020. Way to go, everybody. There are no major changes on the revenue side this year, though it should be noted that part of the fiscal health presented in this budget can be credited to the work of diocesan leadership in the diocesan financial department. Early in the pandemic, adjustments were made to the budget to make every possible effort toward long-term financial stability amid the ongoing pandemic uncertainty. Now let's look at the expense side of things. There are some mission priorities that cannot be contained in a single budget category, such as racial justice and reconciliation. That, in particular, is an area that reaches across every department and budget category. But to give you an idea of the financial resources allotted, if you were to take all of the budget line items that work directly on racial reconciliation and social justice and pull them into a single category, it would look like this. The fact is, much of the work we do overlaps into several categories, and racial justice and reconciliation is a great example of that. Oversight refers to the episcopate, meaning our bishops. The budget supports their salaries and benefits, as well as the cost of their travel and their executive assistants.
The part of our diocesan budget that is labeled episcopacy is really about the ministry of your bishops. Me as your diocesan bishop and Bishop Ann as your suffragan bishop. That's a partnership that we share, but we share it not only with each other, we share it with you. In essence, the office of bishop provides oversight, leadership, prayerful guidance, and a sense and a spirit of unity that draws us together, that binds us together in our common mission. Our common mission, of course, is becoming beloved community.
When I was elected to this position around almost 8 years ago, the message was go to Galilee, go deep into our traditions, go share the good news of Jesus, and go do the work God's given us to do. And nothing about this pandemic or limitations on our travel allowances has stopped your bishops from being quite on the go. Now, we go to Zoom a lot, but let me tell you, this great technology is letting us continue to go and listen and learn and share.
All of us are hungry to get back to the person-to-person, face-to-face contact that we love and enjoy as part of our fellowship. We also recognize that it's in those moments that we are literally living into that promise of what it means to become beloved community. This area of the budget supports all of that work.
Governance refers to the facets of the diocese that pertain to, well, the governing of it. Governance reflects well how Diocesan House does not work alone. People, clergy and lay, from across the diocese add their voices and efforts to guide and represent the work of the diocese.
We often use the word governance when we talk about diocesan structures and processes. Governance sounds a bit boring, and to some ears it might convey a sense of irrelevance, redundancy, or even self-centeredness, but I don't believe that's the case. These diocesan structures and processes, largely funded by the budget we are discussing today, are enablers for the mission of the Church, whether it's at the local level or, when it's more effective to do work on a larger scale, at the regional or diocesan level. From my vantage point, every month I see evidence that these structures and processes do what they're meant to do. They add value. They open possibilities.
Administration refers to the nuts and bolts of running the diocesan offices.
In 2020, communication and
So a lot of
finance
people
faced a year
expressed
like no
interest.
other. These departments work greatly to keep the diocese informed of the ever-changing regulations regarding the pandemic. Communication also launched a new diocesan website and is in the process of developing an electronic version of the Disciple. I was so proud to see us working together and deciding to be brave enough to look within to lift each other up in new ways. While others may struggle with understanding the importance of collaborating financially to support God's mission, this diocese leadership walks towards this choice by making sure decisions we make today with our finances impact the present and the future.
Congregational support and development includes the resources dedicated to the support of our congregations and building partnerships for ministry to thrive in the 21st century. The Congregational Support and Development Team is led by our canons and missioners, who work with parish leadership to guide them on their road to becoming beloved community.
We work with parish leadership to help guide them on their road to becoming beloved community. I know that there are times when, as parish leaders, we wish we had the resources, the support, and the vehicles to face problems and realize opportunities. That's our job.
Our role as regional canons is to support the clergy and the lay leaders of our congregations and to work with the bishops to connect our churches to the ministry of the diocese and to one another. We support our vulnerable congregations, and vulnerability can mean a lot of different things. It could be a church that's in transition. It could be a church going through a conflict. It could be a church struggling with the changes of the demographic community that they live in. And our job is to walk with them and through those experiences. Another area of our diocesan priorities that we work very closely in is collaboration and new ministries. We work with churches and try to find ways to connect them to one another, to see the common areas that they are working and knowing that they're not alone, but also to find that we're stronger together.
And I am thrilled to highlight and to tell the stories of our historically African American congregations that were for far too long sidelined and marginalized. Over the next 4 to 5 years, as a moratorium has been declared on the closing of any African American churches, I look forward to the opportunity to come alongside those, particularly those considered most vulnerable, and help them move from surviving to thriving.
It's a fabulous privilege and joy for me to be one who walks with our Latino congregations and communities as they discern God's mission for them. And I get to walk with them to help them get there. The enthusiasm, commitment, and devotion of their lay and clergy leadership is inspiring and an example. I also get to walk with English-speaking congregations in the diocese who are doing their own discernment about becoming beloved community and want to learn about their Latino neighbors and about the Latino congregations and communities of our diocese.
Lifelong formation encompasses the work of guiding Christian spiritual development across the generations.
The youth department has been offering monthly gatherings for Christian formation and youth leaders. This time together has provided educational resources that offer professional, personal, and spiritual well-being, as well as providing tools to use in our ministries. Last fall, we initiated a program called Speak the Truth, Youth Conversations. We spent one night a week for 5 weeks with guest speakers from around our diocese to speak and engage in conversations with our youth on current topics around today's terminology, our baptismal covenant, policing, monuments, telling our own stories, and concluded with advocacy and activism. We are looking forward to offering more Speak the Truth conversations for our youth in the LGBTQ+ community, mental health, and many other topics that are important to our youth.
Like everyone else, our department has had to find innovative ways to continue relational formation programs.
We've done the bishop book reads. We did one at Pentecost, and then we did one again at All Saints. We're so thankful to our bishops for doing that. We've had our All Saints All Month series. We've also done an All Saints Letter Club. I've been able to send 150 letters out to kids each week in our diocese so they could learn more about the lives of the saints.
This spring, Campus and Young Adult Ministries lost one of our best ways of attracting students, sharing meals together. We found that attendance at online Bible studies and other group events was sometimes spotty, largely due to the Zoom fatigue of students whose classes also went online. So this fall, we combined efforts with others, working with ecumenical and interfaith partners, diversity offices, and other student groups to provide ministry events to a broader audience. In this way, we actually began to reach students we've not seen before. We also learned very quickly how many students were just barely making it, and we became one of many groups providing food, money, and time to keep up with the need. Diocesan Campus and Young Adult Ministries have taken the goal of becoming beloved communities seriously. We recognize the disparity of ministries to the HBCUs in our diocese. We have asked for seed money to start projects at 3 of them this coming year.
So what we do is we try to meet people where they are and let people know that they have a place to come, whether it is a physical place that's maintaining appropriate public health regulations, or it's a virtual space, which we do a lot of right now, where people can come and ask any kind of question they've got, where they can reflect on their spiritual journey, on where they feel God is calling them, where they can rejoice, where they can complain, where they can just come and be. And you hear how people they're growing in God in a time that's really challenging, and that they're deepening their spirituality in moments when it would be just easier to walk away.
The diocesan commitment to formation will be well affirmed in 2021, as we are planning to begin our search for the new diocesan officer for adult formation and lifelong learning. Missional Collaboratives encompasses the ministries that are not ours alone, but the joint efforts of the diocese and others. The work that has long been done in this area readied us more than we knew for adapting to pandemic life, as collaboration became the key to all of us pulling through this together. The power of partnerships was demonstrated over and over again this year. The Racial Justice and Reconciliation Committee reimagined the former Seeing the Face of God course into Dismantling Racism, living into our baptismal vows. Collaborative work in racial reconciliation will go even deeper in 2021 as the diocese delves into its own history to identify and address the systemic racism that exacts a cost even today. Collaborations also flourished in direct services ministries, where ministries such as Abundant Life in Greensboro built personal relationships, even in an online world. Creation care encompasses the work being done in the area of caring for this earth we call home. Don't let the number of this budget line item fool you. It may be small, but the work of the Charter Committee on Creation Care is large and in every way reflective of its place among our mission priorities.
That caring for God's creation is at the very heart of the gospel message to love one's neighbor as oneself. We attempt to accomplish this goal in a variety of ways. Through education and outreach, we have emphasized a variety of environmental ministry issues, including but not limited to climate change, composting, carbon farming, advocacy for local food security, water and energy conservation, and theological justifications for creation care. We also support a successful green grant program aimed especially at assisting small and low-income congregations in starting the good work of environmental ministry. During the pandemic, this grant program has expanded and taken on increased importance as we have continued to search for ways in these strange times to assist and encourage the congregations of our diocese to implement environmental ministry as an integral part of the worship life of their communities.
Before we wrap up, it's worth remembering another key resource area that is here just for you, our grants and scholarships. Though a steady support force for years, our grant funding team has been hard at work since the start of the pandemic to find new and innovative ways to walk with our congregations. 11 grant programs are available to help your church thrive. The North Carolina Episcopal Church Foundation has partnered particularly closely with the diocese this year. When the diocese created the ideas of adaptation grants and the new innovation grants to help churches gain the resources they need to build in a new online world, the foundation didn't hesitate to fund the grants.
The pandemic of 2020 has called us into new frontiers of mission support. Partnering with the diocese, we have been pleased to offer almost $100,000 in adaptation grants to help small churches with emergency funding in the first months of the shutdown. And as all of our churches develop our capacity to serve our people and the world through the marvels of technology, ECF has been pleased to make nearly $300,000 available for innovation grants to help worshiping communities upgrade their computer and streaming capabilities.
One of the many blessings of serving in the Diocese of North Carolina are the many robust grant opportunities for churches and collaborative efforts to find funding for new or growing ministries. Mission endowment grants have been able to support wonderful ministries across the diocese, such as from poverty in Wadesboro and Winston-Salem.
And that's just some of the work coming directly out of the diocese. If we were to start discussing all the mission priority work happening in our churches, we'd be here until 2021 and still not cover it all. Yes, it has been a year to remember. Not only the challenges, but the way we, as the 120 worshiping communities of the Diocese of North Carolina, have come together to face and overcome those challenges. We did it because we are a community and none of us walks alone. Great work was done in 2020 and the work will continue and grow in 2021 and beyond. We are committed to our journey of becoming beloved community. We are the Diocese of North Carolina.
Thank you, team, and thank you all who lended your voices to that inspiring narrative of how this work gets woven together and how we fund it through all of the generosity of our congregations and parishioners across this diocese. You're going to hear more in a minute about these priorities and about our next steps through our mission strategy process. But before that, just to check in, how are we doing on interpretation? Any progress there?
Excuse me, unfortunately, no. We have everything that's supposed to be working except for it actually working.
All right, well, we will do our best. I do want to take a moment and thank the two people who set aside their day to be here as our interpreters. And that is the Reverend Samuel Bourbon and Francesca Rios. And we are very grateful to you for giving your time. And we hope to be able to solve the problem so that we can appreciate your services, and those that are here for interpretation can have that interpretation. We'll keep working on that. So turning now to the mission strategy of the diocese, the next steps in our process, I'm going to introduce two team members, the Reverend Rebecca Yarborough, who is deacon at Chapel of Christ the King in Charlotte, and Sue Guptill, who's a member of Diocesan Council and also a member of St. Philip's in Durham. And Rebecca and Sue and I are going to give you a presentation about where we are today and what are the next steps as we move through a more intentional process about deepening our life together around these priorities. We'll start with Rebecca.
Thank you, Bishop Sam. And I think we have a PowerPoint that's going to come up. There it is. So, the Jesus movement, becoming beloved community, the way of love. We've heard those phrases from our beloved presiding bishop for several years now. And I've heard some folks wonder, as we moved from one expression to another, you know, were these catchphrases of the year, and couldn't we stick with one until we got it right? And it did seem like every year the message changed. But it didn't really, because each one of these phrases are part of our call as followers of Jesus. The Jesus movement reminds us that we are not to stay sitting comfortably in our houses of worship. We are to be moving all the time as Jesus was. We are to be moving like a tide, making an imprint and transforming over time the people we come in contact with, just as Jesus did. The question is, transforming them into what? And the answer is, builders of beloved communities where all people can experience dignity and abundant life and see themselves and others as beloved children of God and act like it. The way of love? Well, that's coming in just a minute. Beloved community today sometimes seems like a dream, as the Reverend Dr. King knew, because it's a vision of the world that is so different from the way the world operates now. And it would be so easy for it to remain a dream or a vision, because there are times that it seems just so unlikely. A former colleague of mine once said, "A vision without a plan is a hallucination." And Deborah was right. But a vision with a plan can be realized. Bishop Curry and other leaders of the Episcopal Church have already provided part of that plan, work that we can do individually and corporately. They rolled out one of the first elements of it, even as they introduced the idea of becoming beloved community, and that is the racial justice and healing that Joyce and Chuck talked about earlier today so beautifully. Because with our country's history, until we tackle that, there is no way we can become beloved community. And the way of love that was mentioned earlier, that is such a key part of the process, because it's a set of spiritual practices that open us to God's presence and form us as people who are deeply connected to God, who is love. And without that connection, without that living in love, we can't do this work. But there's more to becoming beloved community than just those two things. We must identify those areas where belovedness may be lacking toward particular groups or toward the earth areas of vulnerability and fragility. We must also identify areas of opportunity and growth, building on what's already working. And we must do that in our own context, as a diocese, as convocations, as congregations, and even as individuals. It's not easy work. It requires listening and discerning and making room for the movement of the Holy Spirit, all of which following the way of love enables us to do. We are so blessed in our work in this diocese that so much work has already been done by Bishop Rodman, the diocesan staff, the standing committee, and diocesan council. That's how our 5 diocesan priorities emerged. And Bishop Sam has always made it clear that those priorities fall under the banner of becoming beloved communities. Those priorities represent unique needs or opportunities for those of us in the Diocese of North Carolina. But they too are just another step along the road. They have to be fleshed out. They have to be made actionable, because priorities alone can be hallucinations too. But together with goals and action plans, they form a cohesive mission strategy that is our diocesan expression of what it means to live into the way of love, to become beloved community, to be part of the transformational tide that is the Jesus movement. For the rest of this morning, you'll hear more about where we are now in this process and how we got there. You'll also hear about the timeline for next steps. The diocesan mission strategy that will emerge will guide diocesan work, and it can also inform and be adapted by convocations, congregations, and by each of us in our own contexts, in our discernment and work in our own communities. It matters for our church, it matters for our world, and it matters for our souls that beloved community is more than just a dream or a vision. And we all know that with God's leading and our discernment and our hard work, it can become a reality. And now it's my privilege to introduce Bishop Sam to lead us in a review of the priorities and how we got where we are now in preparation for this afternoon's breakout sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we're going to go back to the slideshow shortly. But just a word about those priorities that Rebecca mentioned that you've heard over and over again. We've been talking about them for almost 3 years now. The reality is that for a couple of those years, I maintained that I was the only one that could actually recite them from memory. But part of the exercise in this morning is to teach by repetition, as you've probably figured out by now, because these are priorities that we can carry in our hearts, and they can help us stay focused in the mission that we share. But these priorities have a deeper precedent than even the work of me or Bishop Curry. If they resonate with you, it's probably in part because they actually are connected to the baptismal covenant, which binds all of us together. Listen for a minute about the way our priorities connect to the promises that we made in our baptism. Racial justice, striving for justice and peace among all people, respecting the dignity of every human being. Congregational support, continuing in the apostles' teaching and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and the prayers. Collaboration, seeking Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves. Formation, because formation always leads to proclamation. proclaiming by word and example the good news of God in Christ. Those of you who know these promises well are saying, well, what's he going to do with creation care? That's not one of the 5 promises. But some of you know it is soon to be a 6th promise in the baptismal covenant. Creation care will be represented by this 6th promise when it's added to the prayer book, if it is passed, at our next General Convention. We know we have to wait another year for that because of the announcement yesterday, but creation care will be represented by this promise: cherish the wondrous works of God and protect the beauty and integrity of all God's creation. So these 5 priorities are rooted in the same place we are, in our baptism, in our call as disciples to become disciples who make a difference. And in that process, to become beloved community. And in becoming beloved community, become the leaven in the loaf that transforms our communities, our diocese, our state. The transformation that is at the heart of our work is where we're headed. But it is an organic process. While work has been done up until now, the truth of the matter is this is not a top-down process. Discerning what is already happening here in the grassroots has been a big part of the work that we've undertaken to date. Next slide, please. So in this organic process, we listen, we pay attention, we learn from what the Holy Spirit is already doing and stirring up among us. We look for the places where there is energy, where there is passion, where there is life, and where there is a renewed commitment to God's call. But as we do this work, we need your input. And that's another refrain you'll hear again and again today. We are at the beginning of a strategic planning process, not at the end. And what we need as we move forward is your voices, your perspective, your input, your gifts, because only together can we fully incorporate all the dimensions of what we are being called to do as we live into our baptismal promises through these priorities. But what has happened so far in this process? Next slide, please. What has happened is that we have begun to build a mission strategy plan around these priorities that will take us to a deeper place. It will bless and lift up the work that's already going on, but it will propel us to new intentions, new commitments, because new occasions teach new duties. And here, to date, in our diocese, we began this work almost a year ago. In January and February, just before the pandemic,
connect this one here.
We held 3 retreats early last year. One was with bishops, canoners, missioners, and department leaders on the diocesan staff. Then we held a second retreat with members of Standing Committee and Diocesan Council, the representative bodies of our whole diocese. Then we circled back with input from those 2 groups to the wider staff. We also had a conversation with our mission funders because of their partnership in this work. And from that, we created some goals and some initial thoughts about how to accomplish them. But this work is not written in stone. It is very much a work in progress. And we are still on the front end. Our original timeline was to step into the next pieces of that in March, April, and May, but you know the story of what happened in March, April, and May and beyond. And so we set it aside for a time. We put it on the proverbial back burner. But as we began to plan for this day, we realized that it was time to bring it forward again. That in spite of the pandemic and in spite of the uncertainties of the election that was still ahead of us, our work is clear. Our mission has not changed, and we need to re-engage at the heart of what God has called us to do and be together. Today is the next step in that process and the most important step. Your voices, your perspective, your insights, your gifts, your wisdom, and your passions. Without that, there isn't a plan. There's just a bunch of ideas. But with your input, we create a strategy that we can all live into together. That's the promise that is hidden in the work of becoming beloved community. Your input is the key today in this ongoing process, but there are other sources for information that are helping us in our collective discernment and will help the mission strategy team going forward. To date, the strategy team is made up of 2 bishops, 2 diocesan staff members, 2 standing committee members, and 2 members of diocesan council. Sue will tell you a little bit about the next steps with the committee. But if we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the other important sources of data and information that will inform our discernment. Some of you participated this past spring in focus groups run by the Visions consultants who are working with our diocese. The input from those groups was formulated into a report that's now been shared with Diocesan Council. This report gave us 2 things. It gave us some clear confidence that the work that we had begun is on the right track, that this is where the energy is. This is where the Holy Spirit is stirring up and speaking to us. This is what we are called to do together. But it also identified some clear areas that we need to grow, that we need to pay attention to, that we need to do more work around as we develop this strategy together. So the information for all of you that participated in those groups is being channeled to the mission strategy team for this ongoing work. In addition to that, we have to pay attention to the demographics of the changing landscape in North Carolina. Some of you are aware of the statistic that by the year 2040, half of the population of the United States will be in 8 states, and North Carolina is one of the 8 states. Let me say that again. We are projected for tremendous growth here in the state of North Carolina and in our diocese in the next 20 years to 2040. And we want to be prepared to proclaim the gospel, to live into those promises to those people that are moving here and that are becoming a part of our local communities. So we're paying attention to the demographic data about who is joining us and who we need to reach out to and how we can speak their language and speak their, what the needs that they have, how we can address those needs. These are people with gifts to bring and people with stories to share, and we welcome them with open arms. We're still learning what that landscape looks like, but we know that every person is a beloved child of God, and every person is welcome in the Episcopal Church, and we want to walk with you. In addition to the demographic data, there's a new tool that the Episcopal Church is providing, and it's called MapDash. And MapDash has not only demographic information, but overlays that show us what work is happening around us? Where are there other churches we can partner with? Who are the social service agencies in our neighborhoods? Where are the grassroots already meeting together to achieve goals that we have? And how can we work together and collaborate to address some of those goals? This is a tremendous tool that will help us make sure that in our actions, we're using strategic steps to actually bring this hallucination to a reality. Last but not least, before I turn it over to Sue, I'll say it again. We need your input. Your voice is essential. Your gifts are part of what the Holy Spirit is stirring up. Your passions around these 5 priorities are what we need to hear. And Sue will tell us about how you can participate in that this afternoon. Sue. Sue, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. So we can move on with the PowerPoint. Just go to the next slide. Okay, so this afternoon, scheduled to begin at 1:30. There could be some slippage in the schedule, and if so, you will be told. But approximately 1:30. For the people on the Zoom, in the Zoom meeting, you will have the opportunity to go to breakout groups. The links for those breakout groups were sent to you in your materials, but they'll also be in the chat. So, so you'll have a couple options for figuring out where the breakout groups are. For those of you who are on Facebook Live, YouTube, or whatever platform you're watching this on, stay in your seats. We have something for you too. You get to participate in a town hall with the bishops. Just stay where you are and they will meet with you, and you will have a chance to hear more of their thoughts, but also to share your thoughts with them. This is your opportunity to challenge them, ask them questions, whatever. And so, so those of us in the Zoom meeting are counting on you to be prepared to do that. We can go on to the next slide. So the groups that we're having this afternoon that the Zoom people will be joining. 5 priorities that Bishop Sam has just stated, and he has stated many times: racial justice and reconciliation, vulnerable congregations, collaboration, formation, formation, and creation care. In addition, we still have, in addition to the 5 priorities, we have 2 other groups that have really reflect changes or new things that have come about as we're becoming something new since the pandemic. And that would be innovative worship and direct service. Although we've had direct service all along, we've seen how that has had to become very innovative. So because those 2 things are not official priorities, but they are emerging issues, and because we think that there's a lot of energy around talking about them more, we've added those 2 breakout groups. The first 5 breakout groups already have some goals and some direction, a little bit of direction formed around them. The last 2 are a little more free-flowing. And so if you're in the last 2 breakout groups, the conversation will probably be a little more open and a little less directed, because this is an opportunity to perhaps come up with some new goals or some new directions that haven't been considered at all, because really none have been established for those 2. So those are the 7 areas that you can go to in the breakout groups. Once again, the materials you've already been sent, and it will be in the chat room. Go to the next slide. So as far as what's going to happen during the breakout groups, this will be an opportunity for you to get a little introduction into what some background of the groups and why this is a priority. You will get to see what has already been done as far as some goal setting. And then it will give you an opportunity. There are things that we hope to learn as part of the discussion. The way the discussion is directed will probably vary from group to group, because each set of leaders or facilitators has come up with a different way to approach it. But there are specific things that we hope to learn. We hope that in the course of the conversation, that if we have missed anything or anything that you see that we should have thought of and we haven't, we want to identify those things. We want to identify the things that we have on our list that you might think are not a good idea or shouldn't be there, or perhaps aren't really a priority. We at least want to hear what those things might want to be. We also want to know how you want to be communicated with as we move forward in this process. And we want to also know if you're interested or willing to be part of the process in some way. So as Bishop Sam mentioned, we're going to identify 4 more people to be actually on the mission strategy team. But it might be that you think you don't really want to be on the mission strategy team, but you have particular expertise or interest in a certain area, and you'd like to be available as a consultant or in some different way. So let us know that, and we'll keep that in mind and use the gifts of everybody that we can in every direction that we can. I do see there's a question in the chat about whether people get to select their own breakout groups. Yes, that absolutely. That is totally self-selected. So just choose whichever one you're most interested in. As Bishop, as well as has mentioned several times today, these priorities overlap. And so you might say that you're interested in all of them or 2 or 3 of them, and how do you choose? But there is overlap. So it's not so siloed that if you're thinking about vulnerable congregations, that there's nothing in that about racial justice, or that there's nothing about formation. All of those things, they all interact and overlap. So there's a chance to discuss things to overlap in the conversation also. Next slide. We go after our conversations today. So we have from now until March to come up with what we would like to present at the actual convention in March to the delegates, as far as what our strategies will be. The mission strategy team is going to be meeting frequently, pulling data from all of the sources that Bishop Sam previously mentioned, and start to think about what the plan actually is. And we will be prepared to present that in March. The plan that we present in March as the final plan will be sort of final. As Bishop Sam also has already said, the end isn't necessarily the end, it's just the final strategy we're presenting. But with any strategy, as you move forward and start to work on it, you find that things need to be adjusted, that changes need to be made. So we'll be doing that as we go, evaluate, reform, re-strategize, and continue to move forward. This is a living document and a living plan. The important thing to remember is that this is not a top-down plan. So we aren't going to be the plan is not going to say all parishes will do X, Y, Z. This is how you have to live and act as a parish. It will certainly direct how diocesan resources are used. So you can expect that when we have a strategy that we will focus our resources in that direction from a diocese. And that we certainly hope that parishes embrace the various parts of it and think of how they can live into the strategy and into the plan, but we're not going to tell you exactly how to do it. We do think that diocesan staff will be available to talk to you about it and to help you to think creatively about what you might be able to do, but we are not going to tell you how to do it. So that is our presentation for what we can expect for this afternoon. And when we come back from our breakout meetings, we'll be prepared to present that, to do some presentation to the whole group, so everybody will hear at least a summary of what happened in each of the breakout groups to move forward.
Thank you, Sue and Rebecca, for helping us navigate the next steps in this. We will circle back to that, as Sue said, after the break for lunch.